What do you see when you imagine the future? When we picture what's to come, we often think of innovations that take us to new heights. Some of them are already here, and every day, thousands more make the jump from our imagination into reality. Nowhere is this more evident than here in Japan. Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies are fundamentally transforming the way we do things. All this is happening so fast, and we must do more than just keep up. These emerging technologies open up boundless possibilities of what our future could look like. Technology is not a simple solution to our problems. It poses questions that we need to answer and guidelines we need to write together. That's why we're all here. A global event hosted by Japan that brings together the world's leading voices across disciplines and geographies. How technology will shape our tomorrow depends on the choices we make today. And that starts now.
Small and medium-sized enterprises make up over 90% of the world's businesses, employ over half of the global workforce, and contribute over half of global GDP. And yet they are increasingly being left behind in the fourth industrial revolution. What can be done to ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises thrive in today's global economy? Let's find out. Welcome to Future-Proofing Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises at the Global Technology Governance Summit. In 2019, the Forum, in partnership with the Ministry of Economy of Brazil, launched a pilot program to make emerging technology more accessible to SMEs in the Sao Paulo region, growing from 10 to 100 and now to over 1,000 SME companies in Brazil. The pilot has proven that with a little help, SMEs can remain technologically competitive. The pilot is now being scaled globally by the Forum's SME Future Network at affiliate centers in Colombia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, South Africa, and soon Kazakhstan. On our first panel in today's session, we will dig into the challenges that small and medium-sized enterprises face due to technological and economic transformations, hearing directly from two small and medium-sized business owners that have directly participated in the SME Futures pilot, and from McKinsey, the global consulting company. In our second panel, we're joined by Carlos da Costa, the Minister for Productivity, Labor and Competitiveness in Brazil, Dr. Anas Alfares, President of the King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, Dr. Boingi Nkosi Nzimande, Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation in South Africa. We'll hear from these government leaders to find out what is being done to make the fourth industrial revolution more inclusive. We'll finally conclude today's session with a cross-panel discussion where we'll speculate on what role SMEs will play in global value chains in the future. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our first panel. We have Juliana Franco, co-owner and head of innovation and marketing at Multilab Agroanalytica, Marcello Zaidan, president of Industrias Mangotex, and Solveig Hieronymus, senior partner at McKinsey & Company. She leads McKinsey's Global Center for Government and is a young global leader at the World Economic Forum. So Solveig, let me start with you. Why are small and medium-sized enterprises important in today's globally connected economy?
Jeff, thank you for hosting this discussion for us today. And you said it perfectly in your introduction. I think the two most staggering figures are already out there. It's 90%, more than 90% of global businesses and over half of the world's employment, actually jobs. So clearly a backbone of the global economy. Maybe to add to this, they also drive innovation. They're really the backbone of global innovation. One on the startup and the technology front, but also the traditional SMEs. They hold over 50% of the world's patents, for instance. So this is really innovation and technology in practice. And secondly, it's about resilience. When you think about connected supply chains, whether they are national or global, without functioning SMEs and them being actually productive and connected, we were reminded also in the COVID crisis that supply chains and the role of SMEs within them is absolutely critical. So if the SMEs are prosperous and resilient, the whole economy is. So therefore, it's very important.
So if small and medium-sized enterprises are both the suppliers and the customers in these global supply chains, why is technology so critical? Like what role does emerging technology play for small and medium-sized enterprises?
Absolutely. We looked at this quite a bit, actually, in our work at McKinsey, one from the McKinsey Global Institute. So we do global research on frontier technologies and their uptake and the role of the global economy. But then also many of our government clients are actually acutely aware of the fact that SMEs need to be supported particularly in a different way. So they're actually enabled to take these technologies to next levels for themselves. And we see a couple of barriers I wanted to highlight. And I'm very much looking forward also to the panelists on the second panel from the government side to hear how they are tackling these challenges. There are three barriers and challenges we actually see in this. One, and first, it's really an awareness or transparency gap. So most SMEs, and I'm not talking about your tech startups that are born digital, actually they're not aware what the breadth of technologies out there actually is that already exists today and might be ready and available for them. beyond, let's say, very basic digital skills like hosting an online shop or a channel. So really, what else is out there? A transparency gap, but then also translating that into what's the value this can actually drive for my business then. And those are two very fundamental steps, I think, as a first step, the SMEs need to be able to take. The second step then beyond awareness is actually then the uptake. So how many of them do actually use these technologies? And there again, we see several barriers around this. So first, as an SME, you by definition have less bandwidth. So both structurally, like what can you actually afford to do that's non-core to your business and actually fundamentally driving innovation, but then frankly also financially. So exploring an avenue of innovation and new technology, like any innovation, bears risk, financial risk, risk of failure. Not everything might be a success. So the bandwidth topic in terms of how much capacity do I have to do this beyond my own core business, but then financially, how much can I actually risk to invest in uptake of some of these technologies, with some of these things not coming through or coming through later, like with many investments, some just don't have the bandwidth to do that in a sustainable way, and therefore they don't take it up. And last but not least, other infrastructure topics around, do I have the access and the connectivity right? Do I have the access to the data sets? For instance, I need to innovate for some of the big data solutions out there. I think these are like uptake barriers. And then thirdly, there's a barrier around skills and leadership, and the gap around this. So globally, there's a shortage on tech talent, deep tech talent, innovative talent. So now when you think about SMEs, and then again, I'm excluding the digital native and the tech unicorns in the making, is the best talent, or is there enough talent actually in the SMEs right now? Can you afford to
Solveig, so speaking of tech challenges, I just froze there for a minute. And so that's one lack of bandwidth, but a little bit different than small and medium-sized enterprises. But I think the three barriers you just highlighted, awareness, uptake, and skills and leadership, are pretty consistent with what we've seen. I actually want to get the perspective from Marcelo. Marcelo, you run a medium-sized business in the Sao Paulo region in Brazil. You're a manufacturing business as opposed to the sort of digital native that Solveig was speaking to. Do those challenges, how do they play out in your business? What challenges do you face with adopting technology? And does the story Solveig is telling, does that ring true to you?
Jeff, there are many challenges. Labor, to find the skilled labor is one of them. If we look for some specialist in IoT or Industry 4.0, there are few people skilled that you can hire. So most of the, you have to train your own people in order to have these skills. So that's the first challenge. Capital is another thing. So the technology requires investments. You get a little bit afraid of getting the wrong technology. We see that many of the technology gets obsolete so quickly. So to choose the right technology to implement, bring us some. We get afraid of doing that because of this change of getting obsolete so quickly. That's I would say that this is most of the challenges we have.
Interesting. And I'm curious, obviously the last year has changed every business. And how has COVID impacted, SMEs in particular? And what has that meant for your ability to prioritize technology?
Well, the COVID made a lot of changes in our company, and the impact was huge. First, our customers shut down. We supplied to the car industry, to the automotive industry, And in March, because of the impact of the COVID, most of the companies shut down. And so we have to stop our company. So that was the first challenge. Second, we also supply to the agricultural machine business. And the agricultural machine is a kind of business in Brazil that is doing very well. So they didn't stop. So we have to bring our people back to the company in order to supply to them. And the second challenge was to find the right protocol to have our people safe in our company. And at that time, we didn't have regulations about it. And we have to look, in our case, we could get information from Toyota and Volkswagen, as they have operations in China. They have some protocols for safety that we introduced in our company. And in order to bring people back and return to work. Then we had a third challenge because of the currency here in Brazil. Our currency was devaluated against US dollar, and that brought a lot of opportunity for nationalization of the importations that was happening here in Brazil. So we have an increasing volume, also opportunities for exportation. So we have to hire people, train people, and to get back to a situation of business that was records of productions and so on. And finally, the last change, and I'm sure it's not the last one, new challenges will come, is regarding that not all the companies were able to increase their production of the COVID. And there are several raw materials that are lacking in the market, like the chips, and they are causing the companies to stop. And in our business, plastics and price of raw materials going up. So that is a really big challenge now, how to deal with this situation of lack of material and increasing prices. So the COVID situation brought us challenges almost every day. That's a very complicated thing to manage.
And so, Marcello, how, when you're dealing with these critical business challenges that COVID has brought up, does investing in technology remain a priority? Or did you find that you didn't have the time to focus on it because you were so busy fighting fires related to the pandemic?
Yeah, as our business is one of the most competitive ones, our customers, they have the ability to buy parts from all over the world. They have plants in all the countries. So if we stop investing in technology, we will be behind. So it is really tough to manage all this changing situation, and at the same time to continue the investments to keep the company updated. But we really believe that's the way, because without that, those opportunities that we got regarding exportation wouldn't happen. So in the end, we have to keep investing all the time in order not to stay behind the market. So that's something that we can never stop, even in situations like that.
Wonderful. And, I think that's a perfect segue actually to our next panelist, Juliana. My question for you, is building off of this. What support, I suppose, do small businesses need? You're the co-owner of a small family-owned business. You serve the agricultural market in Colombia. How do you need support over the last year, but also in the future, to better adopt technology for your own business, but also for your clients?
Gracias, Jeff. Sí, pues considero que, digamos
Yes,
que sería
Jeff, thank you. Actually, I think it would be quite relevant to get support on 3 points. First of all, we would like to have human talent that would be expert, qualified, of high level, even at a doctorate level, people who can really have a good use of technology. And this for several focuses. First of all, we need to diagnose our needs to transform ourselves digitally. In our daily life, we are not aware of our potential if we apply the technology rightly. If some expert with a global vision can come in, then they will help us increase our potential. The second focus is to train multidisciplinary teams, very expert in technology, but also expert in our sector, in how we use technology in our sector. In our case, the agro-industrial business. If we have a multidisciplinary team, then we could implement digital transformation in a healthier way, and we would forget our fears, and we would trust that technological implementation may impact our business. And also, I would say that we need to access capital and simple resources. You know, we would need a capital, but in a very easy way. This would help us get early success, and this is essential if we want to motivate the whole business, our teams, anyone implied in this transformation. And also, something that's very important, we need tools that will enable us to change our organizational culture and managerial structure, because we have a very traditional culture and we need a more innovative culture, and we need a culture that goes towards digital transformation. What type of planning for the ecosystem? We need to know that, and we used it, and it's helped us leave our fears behind, and we were able to empower people. It gave us access to new technological businesses, and also quite relevant to learn while doing. You know, when we implement and at the same time we do, then it helps. For instance, we were in a pilot project of digital transformation, and this way we were able to transform and we became from a traditional company to a company that has a roadmap for to become a real digital company. I think these would be the 3 fundamental essential points in my case.
Those are great examples. You know, we heard about, you know, the talent problem has come up, I think, from all of our speakers. Obviously, there's a major talent gap we need to address. I love this idea of multidisciplinary teams, Juliana. And how have you overcome the culture gap in creating multidisciplinary teams in the digital transformation of your own business? What does that look like?
En nuestro caso, nosotros somos
In
una
our case, we are a very small business. We have 8 workers, employees. In our company, I'm in charge of the innovation process. And basically, what we did was identify through the relationships the relevant people. We were able to identify an expert in soil fertility, an agronomist. So we were able to have agree on an alliance with the most important research group in Colombia on in artificial intelligence. And we also partnered with one of the experts, and also we drew from all the knowledge we had in our own business, and we also got the support of the fourth revolution that helped us with a company X that was an expert in technological transition. And we also set up a committee for this specific project. And this enabled to have a technological insight, but also an insight of the specific development of our implementation. But we also had the insight of the agriculture and how this would impact the agricultural world, because we're in contact with small, medium, and great agricultural businesses in Colombia. So we were able to go forward, and we were able to solve issues one after the other, one after one, and we looked for the best solution always.
Well, that's a great example, I think, of how small and medium-sized enterprises, on the one hand, have a great competitive advantage in the fourth industrial revolution, in that when you are a smaller company, it may be easier to enact cultural change and build local connections and build some in-house expertise. I think there's a degree of agility, but you need access to resources and to networks. And it's great to hear that the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Colombia has helped Multilab and Agroanalytica with building that local community. I'm looking at the time here. I really want to make sure we have time for a rich discussion on our second panel, but I do want to turn back to Solveig for just one moment, if I may. Solveig, we've heard some consistent themes across this panel. Has anything come out to you that is either surprising or anything that has come out that actually reinforces some existing perspectives that you've had?
Yes, so certainly reinforcing is the talent side. I mean, there's a shortage of technology talent, and how you enable this in particular as a sector for SMEs. I think that's evident and came out across. I think what was a notion I haven't heard yet, and I often see as a barrier in my work, is actually the access to data, to large-scale data sets, and how this is often a competitive disadvantage for SMEs when they want to innovate on the basis of this. So I would also be curious to hear thoughts on this. And then, of course, how these challenges can be overcome. So how do you, as a regulator, I'm very curious to hear from our panelists on the second panel, then how do you overcome this as a regulator? The skills and talent shortage, the data and the access, and maybe also some topics around infrastructure and connectivity that would be core enablers for this.
Wonderful. Well, then let's not wait any longer and go to our second panel. I'm pleased to maybe kick off with Minister Carlos da Costa, if I may. We've heard about these skill challenges. We've heard about access to capital challenges. What is the government in Brazil doing to help small and medium-sized enterprises with some of those topics?
It's a pleasure to be with you here, sharing our experience in Brazil and what has worked and not worked in the previous years. Small companies, which amount to 9 million firms in Brazil, require a much more flexible environment than large companies. They don't have resources to have huge administrative areas. They need to change their business models very fast. So our first step of a 4-program step to support small companies in Brazil was to improve the business environment. Overall, we have a challenge to increase 70 positions in the doing business ranking of the World Bank, but also specifically and urgently for small businesses. So we implemented an advocacy for small business in the whole country in such a way that if they are abused by regulators, by any kind of civil servant, they can have support. The second part is managerial capabilities. There's a huge lack, not only in Brazil, but in the whole world, of managerial capabilities. And we are following a proved model designed by Bloom and Van Reenen, and we are implementing that to strengthen managerial capabilities of 2 million small companies in Brazil. It's a partnership between the government and the private sector to support in a very specific program that includes actual consultancy for 120,000 of these companies that will end up in the digitization of those companies. That's very important. Small companies in Brazil only have 20% of productivity of large companies. This same number for OECD is 56%. And one of the basic problems that they face is lack of managerial capabilities. The third thing is workforce skills. And this is not only for small companies, but that affects more small companies, because the most skilled workers generally go to large companies in Brazil, unfortunately. So we are implementing a program for 10 million people that include a program for 8 million people for digital skills. And that includes as well a program for almost 5 million people that Microsoft is donating to our country. And this is going to cause a huge leap. This is the largest donation that I've ever heard of an IT company to a government. And fourth, they need capital. They are very capital credit constrained. And we have implemented this year, in the middle of pandemic, and also because of the pandemic, a program that of guarantees to small businesses that has leveraged $30 billion in credit for them. And this is causing a revamping, because those companies mostly did not have credit history. Now they have credit history. They received seed guarantee from the government. And let me share, finally, a small pilot program that we have made with the World Economic Forum Affiliate Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution to leverage the adoption of IoT in small companies. We are going to leverage this to thousands of companies, but we began with 50 in a pilot program. These 50 companies received seed money of $3,000, 24 hours of consultancy and matching with the vendors. And they followed a program that begins with the business case that they need to tackle, then the use cases of the similar companies that are brought to them, the selection of the most appropriate vendor, the seed money, as I said, and the consultancy for implementation and training. In the end, and I'll end here, only 26% of those companies intended to invest in IoT without government support. After the program, 80% of the companies continue investing without government support. That's unintentional, that's actual investment. Second, only 5% of those companies had training for skills related to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. After the program, 80% of them decided to keep on investing. 84% of them decided on keeping investing. So seed money, this push for those companies is absolutely essential. And that's what we plan to leverage for 2 million companies in Brazil.
Wow. It shows how, with a little bit of support, $3,000, a couple hours of consulting for training and implementation, you can really overcome some of these structural barriers. So I'm very keen to now turn to Dr. Nzimande. South Africa has many similarities with Brazil, rich mining, agricultural, and manufacturing industries, for example, but also a lot of differences. How is the government helping small and medium-sized enterprises in South Africa? And what lessons might you have from Brazil, and what might be different from the Brazil example?
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks to all the panelists. It's good to be here. Firstly, I would just like to say, as you underline, we are learning a lot from the Brazilian experiment because there are lots of similarities, and challenges that we face. I'm not going to focus on those, but just to mention access to markets is a challenge, access to finance, low skills levels. And of course, in South Africa also, we've got the history of apartheid, racial inequalities, geographical inequalities, and gender inequalities. All those are issues that we take into account in our support. Maybe just to mention a few key areas of interventions to support SMEs. The first one is that we're proud as South Africa that we've got very strong policies, about supporting and strengthening the SME sector. Of course, there is always a challenge between good policies and their implementation. But in order to then bridge the gap between good policies and implementation, government also, one of the things that government has adopted is that all SMEs that are supplying services or products to government must be paid within 30 days, because we had identified that as one of the big things that happened that actually collapse your small and medium enterprises. The third thing, of course, is that since 2009, we established a dedicated Ministry of Small Business Development with a department that focuses exclusively on support for SMEs. Before, it was part of the Department of Trade and Industry, but then it was found that that department sometimes tended to be overwhelmed by the interests and the needs of the large companies. The other area of intervention that's very important for us is we've got what we call technology stations, which are largely located in our universities of technology, which are doing a lot to support small and medium enterprises through provision of specialized equipment as well as technological support, for instance, in domains such as manufacturing, agro-processing, and so on. They also have got a training function that in a particular locality, certain SMEs can go to a technology station to experiment with their new ideas, as well as also to be supported in terms of technology and so on. So those are some of the measures. As I say, I may just conclude, by saying that the Brazilian experience is also very informative that, yes, as I've said, we've got policies, but we need very specific policy protocols, and also not to just throw money at the SMEs. Yes, money may be a problem, but it's not always the problem. There are all these other things that we need, which if I get a chance, I can talk to, like skills, as well as support in terms of innovation.
Well, let's double click on that, Dr. Nzimande. We heard from Juliana on the first panel how community and kind of cross-functional teams are so important to innovation. And it sounds very similar in some ways to the role that your technology stations may play. So I am quite interested to hear how you are thinking about driving innovation in small and medium-sized enterprises. And also we heard from Solveig about infrastructure. Is there any investment in kind of the underlying infrastructure that is required as well?
Absolutely. The technology stations, in fact, they are part of the infrastructure that we are building in order to be able to support small and medium enterprises with infrastructure. But over and above infrastructure, there are also other technologies like digital access is something that is very important. In fact, in South Africa at this point in time we are in a very ideal but also potentially problematic situation. We are releasing spectrum for data. Of course, there are all sorts of claims, big companies, they want this, your mobile operators, but we also want spectrum reserved for education. The SME sector is saying we want spectrum reserved for SMEs so that we've got cheaper data. The Competition Commission also has been one of the instruments that we've used to ensure that your big mobile operators lower the data costs in terms of the data that they actually control. So those are some of the issues, in terms of infrastructure as well as digital support that we are actually giving to small and medium enterprises, and affordable data for that matter. But in all this, we are also biased in particular towards youth enterprises, because the biggest problem that we have, like Brazil, is high levels of youth unemployment. Between 15 and 35 years in South Africa, we are estimating 60% of the people in that age range are unemployed. So we need to actually focus whatever support we have to bias towards youth, and in particular young women also, who tend to be more vulnerable if they don't have the kinds of support to effectively participate in the economy.
Really fascinating that in having a robust and inclusive small and medium-sized enterprise base also addresses those inequalities, inequities, whether they are the historical racial inequalities, gender inequalities, or even inequalities of age. Really fascinating examples, and a hopeful example as well for how other countries can tackle this. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Anas for your perspectives. We've heard from two of our ministers on government intervention to help small and medium-sized enterprises. You have a unique perspective as president of the Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, where you get to work not only on the policy side of things, but also working directly on technology development and research, as well as with industry. I'm quite keen for your perspective on how these different stakeholders need to work together to help small and medium-sized enterprises.
Thank you, Jeff. First, and to answer your question, I'd like first to echo my fellow panelists on the value and undisputed contribution of SMEs to the economy. In the context of Saudi Arabia, and I'll focus mostly on the context of Saudi Arabia, today more than about 99% of private sector companies are SMEs. With today an increasingly demanding customer base, businesses will undoubtedly need external help to achieve their sustainable growth. Therefore, we believe a simple, transparent, even stable, and enforceable regulatory environment forms a base upon which a dynamic enterprise sector could evolve and develop. So let me phrase the following, or comment on it in the following. So how have policymakers, at least in the context of Saudi Arabia, are working on creating such an environment specifically for SMEs? And to answer that, I'd like to focus on the Kingdom's Vision 2030 and some of its very specific objectives that were really designed for SMEs through the National Transformation Program. And I'll focus on really three of those. One is the facilitation of doing business. The second is on increasing SMEs' contribution to the economy, and third on really the development of the digital economy. So in the case of facilitating doing business, in 2016, the Kingdom established the SME Authority, or what's also known as Munsha'at. So we weren't we didn't start it as early as South Africa, as the minister had pointed out back in 2009, but we did start the authority in 2016, and which was mainly focused on really supporting SMEs. And in the work they do, they review laws, regulations to remove really all regulatory obstacles and facilitate access to funding and enabling youth and entrepreneurs as well to market their ideas and products. when at its inception, I'm referring to the SME Authority, the SME contribution to GDP was around 20%. Today, after 5 years of their creation, we're now accounting for about 28%. And so we believe we're also on track to meet the goal of 35% by 2030. Now, let me move then to the contribution, or the second objective of the Vision 2030. We currently work on increasing SMEs' innovation and contribution to the economy. And this is done, again, through multiple technology transfer facilitators, such as incubators or access to venture capital and beyond. And I'll just point out a few of the programs that were really deployed in this regard. So the Badr technology program was deployed with the goal of transforming technical projects. This was hosted at King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology with a specific objective of supporting and nurturing entrepreneurship and innovation and technology. Now, even in universities, several techno valleys were established both in Riyadh and Dhahran and in other places, with a very strong public-private partnership for commercialization of technology as well that has been emerging from universities and research centers. In regards to financing, we have really deployed several programs. There is the Saudi Development Funds program, or Kafala program, for financing SMEs in the mining, energy, industry, and logistics sectors and beyond even. We've also have currently the Saudi Venture Capital Company. This is a large VC government-owned to really stimulate the venture investments by investing in different companies and supporting even angel investors within the country. We've also deployed several new fintech models to support both operational capital and short-term financing opportunities to help, again, SMEs cash in their invoices through multiple peer-to-peer lending platforms. I've heard some of the comments on COVID, and I think it's very important to also point out what has the damage that COVID has caused. Of course, there is no doubt that it really threw a wrench in the momentum across the board in many of our of the activities. But we've also tried, at least from the government perspective, to support SMEs. So in that regard, the Saudi Central Bank implemented a postponement of payments program worth more than 30 billion riyals to help funding authorities in providing capital to SMEs. We've also looked at, the government has also looked at postponing the collection of custom duties and payments and fees. Last, let me also just comment on the digital transformation, and I think due to the COVID, and I think everyone would agree, the digital transformation went from a nice to have to a must have, and as a necessity even to these SMEs. How did we go about really supporting the digital economy and SMEs? We really worked heavily on leveraging digital transformation and the digital economy, we went on looking at capacity building, even creating funding support for many of them in regards to their transformation. We believe this is critical throughout, and we've been looking at improving the infrastructure through the Ministry of Communication and Technology, is currently working on an aggressive 5G rollout, enabling really the technology sector as a whole, but specifically targeted to SMEs. On supporting commercialization of research output, we cannot again underestimate the contributions that have come through technology transfer offices and incubators and technology incubators that have also commented on. To wrap up, I think at least in the context of Saudi Arabia, we're working on different measures really to support SMEs. Include the reduction of regulation barriers to entry. We're looking at increasing access to diversified financing. We're looking at really creating and bridging the connection between R&D and market through incubation and capacity building. And we believe there is a strong really need to promote policies that support the 4IR adoption throughout these SMEs, and that's precisely one of the reasons why we've partnered with the World Economic Forum through the network of centers at the Fourth Industrial Revolution, with really the strong objective to accelerate the development of such policies. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Anas. That is a wonderful tour of the various policy interventions that are occurring in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And if there's a theme that I can pick up on between our three kind of panelists so far, it's that actually there is a huge opportunity with a little bit of the right incentives, a little bit of the right intervention from government to reduce the barriers, to provide a little funding support. It doesn't even have to be that much, or a little expert support, and you see enormous gains. I think your statistic of 20 to 28%, eight percentage points change in GDP contribution from SMEs is really remarkable, really remarkable. Yeah, fascinating. And I would love to hear from our first panelists, if for their comments on what we've just heard from our government leaders here. Maybe I'll turn to Marcello first to see if you have a question that you'd like to pose to one of our second panelists.
Thanks, Jeff. Mangotex was one of the 10 first companies in Brazil to work together with the government and the World Economic Forum to introduce Industry 4.0. We received the $3,000 and the consultancy of university and people that came here. We introduced the improvements in one line, and after that we could continue and introducing the other lines, and we are supposed to finish this year the completed digitalization of our company. So the incentive was really worth. I congratulate for the initiative, and I take the opportunity to ask Mr. Carlos regarding all this, talking about COVID. Brazil made a lot of investments to help the companies during that time, not only the companies, but also the people that were unemployed and so on. So that was a huge investment. And if you compare Brazil with other developing countries, we have a debt rate high to the gross domestic product. And of course, it grew during this period of the COVID. But it seems that Brazil is doing better than other countries in the recovering of the COVID. If you compare our expectation of growth this year compared to other countries. So my question is, these incentives from the government, you understand that they were correct and it was the right thing to be done?
Well, looking at the results, and I came from the private sector. I've been an entrepreneur for my whole life. And I measure the success of initiatives by the results that it brings. And if we look at the recovery of the GDP in the second semester of last year and first quarter of this year, and the amount that we have spent for businesses, we are certainly the country with the largest return on investment of the world, because we have spent a lot of money to support people who have lost their jobs, people who would have lost their jobs if we hadn't given them money, people who were in the informal sector and did not have any welfare to support them. But for businesses, we have focused our initiatives in credit for small businesses, payroll support for all businesses, and deferral of taxes. We haven't given grants or any other stimuli like this. And these ones have helped a lot all businesses. We have all kinds of surveys with them and comparison groups and so on. And we are planning to implement the same thing here in a very near future, because we are facing a second wave, which is even stronger than the first wave. Henceforth, the impact on businesses is very strong. The difference is that now the debt to GDP ratio is too high. So we are certainly planning to do the same thing that worked, but focused on the most affected sectors of the economy. What we are absolutely sure is that the return for these government funds is so high that we are certain that the increase in the tax revenue in the future, when we compare against a counterfactual of no help at all, will certainly pay off. So for the long run prospect of the debt to GDP ratio, these expenditures are fiscally very responsible. We are planning to continue them. We are working with the Congress because that requires the support of the Congress to make sure that this will reach those that need the most.
Wonderful. Thank you, Minister Da Costa, for an exhaustive answer to a very important question. Great to see that Brazil is responding to this crisis with a level head as much as possible when it comes to their small and medium-sized enterprises. I'd like to turn to Solveig next to see if she has a question for our second panel here.
I would love to, and thank you, first of all, for sharing all these really inspiring examples from what you're doing already to support SMEs. I was particularly inspired around the talent angle, what you're already doing to build these capabilities for the SME sector that are so important for the fourth industrial revolution. So my question is, how do you make those capabilities stick with SMEs once they're developed? Do you have any thoughts around this? Because poaching for high capability tech skills is very common in any sector and in any geography. So while it's beneficial to the economy overall, I'd be very hopeful that these talents also stick and have a perspective in the SME sector. Do you have any thoughts around this or any special initiatives going on that front? That'd be interesting to hear.
Great question. Maybe I will turn to Dr. Nzimande to respond. How do you keep your labor engaged in SMEs after they've kind of gained these new skills?
Thank you very much for that question. It's a very important matter because one of the biggest challenges that face small and medium enterprises is ability to keep skilled labor. But I do also, by the way, need to indicate, which is something that I did not say, that the larger part of our SME are very informalized. It's in the informal sector. But one of the interventions that we are making, we've got what we call in South Africa a skills levy system. Every employer who employs more than 50 workers pays 1% of his or her payroll to a central skilled education and training authority. And up to 50% of that contribution comes back in what is called mandatory grants, which means the authority is mandated to give a contributing employer 50%. The other 50, up to 50%, not always 50, the other 50% is discretionary. So a sector education and training authority in manufacturing may say there is unevenness here. Certain parts of the industry is not adequately supported or does not have enough skills, or the skills they need are very expensive, and therefore some of those discretionary grants are targeted to that. This is to try and ensure that there is ongoing human resources development to also supply your SMEs. The SMEs are some of the biggest beneficiaries out of the skills levy system that we actually have in South Africa, in order to ensure that they are able not just to train workers to have the knowledge, but also they are able to replace that. But it is indeed a challenge, because given the large informal sector, battling SMEs, they fall into what one may say is the informal economy. And not much actually graduate, you know, and become bigger and so on. We may argue whether that's ideal or not. But that system is actually very important in terms of supporting training. As I've already said, I don't want to repeat this, our technology stations also provide a lot of support to SMEs in terms of technology, you know, the uses of technology in order to be able to do that. But it's an ongoing struggle, it's an ongoing battle, you know, because it's easier for bigger companies to just poach from the smaller companies. At least we have a system that tries to ensure consistent supply.
Well, I think there's a lot that we could learn from a system like that, Dr. Nzimande, and I hope that across the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution network, that they are taking notes from what we have heard, not only from yourself, but also from Minister Da Costa and you know, Dr. Anas as well. You know, this has been a really enlightening conversation. I actually think a very hopeful one. We've heard that, you know, through kind of 4 main areas of intervention, you know, training and expert support, creating a strong business environment with good infrastructure and digital access, a little bit of access to capital and financing, and finally creating a great ecosystem and community for small and medium-sized enterprises to tap into, that we can really move the needle on the productivity, on the competitiveness of our small and medium-sized you know, enterprises, and in particular drive them to adopt more and more technology, which will keep them competitive. There's a couple challenges, though, that we also raised. One is awareness, you know, that it's only so good, these policies are only so good if small companies are aware of them and aware of the technologies and the benefits that can come from them. And also, I think, kind of packaging this up in a way that is accessible to small companies. You know, we heard about the bandwidth constraints. If you're a smaller company, you can't hire somebody to just focus on policy. That is something that you know, will be one of many tasks that an employee does. So how do you make these policies digestible for a small company is a challenge as well. I think we've also heard that COVID has accelerated the necessity for digital transformation. Dr. Anas told us that, you know, with every business now has a digital component that it didn't before because of COVID. And so that has only made this transformation for small companies even more important. Really a brilliant panel today. So thank you to all of our speakers for joining us, for making the time. I know we're across many time zones. And so really appreciate everyone sitting down today to join us from the World Economic Forum. A great thank you. And I'd like to hand it to my colleague, Jeffrey Merritt, to make some final remarks here.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to all of our great panelists today. Look, to all of you who are out there watching this session from around the world, if you found this of interest, I have great news for you. Over the last 2 years, the World Economic Forum has been building a really unprecedented community of the world's leading practitioners who are working to make the Fourth Industrial Revolution more inclusive and to level the playing field for our small and medium-sized enterprises. We call this global community the SMEs Futures Network. And that network is charting a course to help policymakers, businesses, and SMEs collaborate on solutions that are both scalable and sustainable. In addition to pilot programs that are now running in Brazil, Colombia, South Africa, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Kazakhstan, the network hosts regular community meetings, and we're in the process of establishing a global business advisory group to help support these pilot programs and help them scale. If you'd like to get more involved in the pilots, if you'd like to join the business advisory group or our community discussions, you can find out more on the World Economic Forum's website. You can also send us an email at iot@weforum.org. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Global Technology Governance Summit. Thank you.